Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Sorry, closer. Sorry. What a beautiful day in Door County, huh? Mom has to be looking down on us today. It's a beautiful day. So on behalf of Larry and Sherry and Emily and Jenny Lee and Mark and Tom and the boys and myself, we want to thank all of you for coming. Thank you. Some of you came from down the beach, but some of you came by ferry and others by plane from Michigan, Connecticut, Wisconsin, Illinois, Washington, Bark Road, Glidden Drive, Spain. We even had somebody coming from Spain. You're all here because you are friends and family and neighbors and folks that knew Mom from the many organizations that she was part of, Whitefish Bay Association, Door Property Owners, Women's Connection, League of Women Voters. There's probably more that I don't even know of. There's something DCEC, I think it's Door County Environmental. No, not ACDC, DCEC.
Mom never told me about that.
She's a rocker, huh? And the church choir as well. She was very involved in the church, as always. We also want to remember our friends and family that weren't able to be here today. Aunt Betty, Aunt Barb and Carl, Laura Jo Otto. And we also want to remember our loved ones who are not with us here today. Uncle Larry, Dad, Grandma and Grandpa, Uncle Chuck.
Ain't no crying.
I know, Uncle Hal. Uncle Hal.
I specifically read a note from my mother that said, "There'll be no. We're not supposed to be sad today," which is pretty tough. But I remember reading that, and I thought, "Okay, Mom, I'll try." So, you got that, Mary Pat? You guess you didn't read that one.
Footnote.
Well, you know, Mom planned ahead a lot of times. She was a planner, and this is a celebration of her life that she wanted, and she planned ahead of time, and really wanted us to just execute in the summer here in Door County in this beautiful place that she loved so much. So we're just really carrying out her wishes, and we're so glad that all of you could be here to help us do that. This is a celebration of her life, and much of her life revolved around Door County, the place she loved, the place that she had so many memories that many of you all shared with her. And as you know, she had an open door policy, so whenever anybody came by or came up and didn't have a place to stay, she opened her house to all of us. And we hope to continue that tradition. And her love for Door County was so obvious, from her dedication to environmental issues, to her involvement in politics, and I know many people didn't necessarily agree, but she took a stand on issues and stuck to it, and had a lot of conviction, and her endless time and devotion and commitment to those issues, going to meetings, volunteering her time, even if she had guests and company, she'd take off and go to those meetings, and that was a priority for her. And it's a tradition and a role model and an inspiration for all of us to try to live into that and carry on in her manner. We hope that we can carry on her love, her preservation, and her caring for the natural resources of this beautiful area. And a couple things on your tables. You may have noticed there were some note cards. A little icebreaker that had a question on it to see how well some of you might have known Mom. So you can find your card, and you might want to read it out loud, and if you know the answer or can guess the answer's on the back, so no peeking. No peeking. There are also note cards on the table, blank note cards, and those are for all of you to write a favorite story or remembrance or memory that you had of Mom. If you'd like to share that, we're going to put that in a scrapbook. We've learned through the years that many of you knew Mom in many different ways, and ways that we didn't necessarily even know about because we weren't here all the time. So every time we talk with somebody new, we learn a different side of Mom that, that we didn't know, we didn't have that appreciation for. So that's what those cards are really designed for. Lastly, we'd like to have a toast to Mom. So if everyone has a glass, we're here to celebrate Mom's love and her life and her friendship. And there's a saying that a life well lived is a life worth celebrating. So we are here to celebrate. Here we are.
Hey, come on.
And we have a couple of special guests. Sue Kohout is here from League of Women Voters. And I don't know how many of you know, there was a tribute made in Mom's name, both for the League of Women Voters and door property owners, as a tribute to her and to her commitment to those organizations. And they've created this award that then they give out each year to another deserving individual. So is Sue here? Yeah, Sue, would you mind coming up? And then we will open the mic up, and we would love for anybody that would like to come up and say a few words or share a story. You would be welcome to do so. Or stay at your seat, and we'll stay at your seat, and we can bring the mic over to you.
We're gonna sit down.
I just wanted to. I'm Pat's son, Larry. And in case you, for those. First of all,
Those are the autos.
yeah.
We don't know them, but they're
And I just wanted to say thank you to my brother and my sister for putting this together, helping put this together. And if it weren't for those two, we wouldn't have this. And and everybody, but especially my sister, Mary Pat. She put a lot of work into this. And your presence here gives us a lot of support to continue in my mom's in the same way she did. So thank you for being here. Really, we feel the support, and it feels great. And we want to continue her work and the love as best we can. It's going to take three of us, I think, to do what she did. Here you are. Thank you.
Mary Pat had asked if we would share information about a tribute that the Door County League did for Pat this year. So if you forgive me, I'll just read the statement basically that was read at our annual meeting. The Door County League of Women Voters lost a very special member and a powerful force for good government this past year when we lost Pat. Pat joined the League in the early 90s after her move to the county. She became a pillar of the Door County League's voter service efforts year after year. However, Pat was best known in the community for her efforts as an observer and advocate for good government. Each month, for more than 15 years, she attended approximately 8 county government committee meetings, meetings of her town board, town planning committee, local school board, and school district committees, as well as meetings of other pertinent governmental bodies, logging literally hundreds of hours and miles in her tireless pursuit for transparent and responsive government.
And hundreds of pages of notes.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And and hundreds of phone calls following up on all of this.
And
sleepless nights.
And that's why the open door policy. She left the door open for us because she was never there.
There you go. It is true. Pat acquired a vast understanding of the workings of local government, sharing it with others and representing her various groups or herself as needed. She earned the respect of local officials and regular citizens alike because she was persistent, patient, positive, and a peacemaker. Pat's example resulted in the revitalization of the Door County League's Observer Corps. In May at our annual meeting, we honored her memory with the creation of the Pat Miller Observer Corps Award to be presented each year to a league member who has shown the light of public scrutiny on the workings of government. God knows it needs it. Pat truly made Door County a better place for all of us, and we miss her.
Thank you. If there's anyone else that would like to have a mic to share a story. What? Oh, Danny's offering to bring it around. Is Kip here? Kip's here? Yeah, bring it over to Kip.
Go, Danny. Oh, you're a good one. Clever boy. Yeah. I totally hate funerals, memorials, and I'm not even going to my own. So. My name is Kip Pagel. I'm the secretary for Door Property Owners. If you're in it, I'm the one that writes that newsletter. Pat Miller, she's a gracious lady. She was on the board. I gotta control myself. She was on the board since 1990, and I joined in 97 and got to know her a little bit. My first or second meeting, I made some sort of a sexist remark, I guess. As I've been known to do. And I got a real scowl from the executive secretary. After the meeting, he came up to me and says, "You can't do that." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "You cannot pick on Pat. You just can't do that." And I said, "Why?" He says, "After all, she was a feminist and a woman libber." Oh boy. So, next meeting, being me, just to test it, I did it again. I expected a rise. And after the meeting, Pat came up to me and she goes, "I know what you're doing." And she says, one, I'm not going to bite. And two, she says, don't worry, I'm having fun. I found somebody with a sense of humor. So we were just jousting, so we did a lot of this, and we got along great. Every night after meetings, we'd go to the neighborhood pub and we'd get a bite and a beer. And as I was prone to do at unprecedented times, and just for the heck of it sometimes, one year I got her a photo of some trilliums and gave it to her at the annual meeting, just because she was a good person. And I never did really expect a reaction to it, but then I find out that trilliums were her favorite flower. And I think that picture is probably still in the living room. I know that because when I stopped there one time, I noticed the piano. My mother had a grand piano too. They're good for one thing. They're the place you can crawl under at a party and nobody steps on you while you're sleeping. But I asked her about the piano, and she said that she'd played the piano, but then I found something out that I didn't know Pat worked for the Illinois Correctional Institutions, not as an inmate, but she taught piano to prisoners. And I think this is something about this music hath charm to soothe the savage beast, and she said that was really true. And she some of them were very good. But Pat had her own brand of charm, guile, knowledge, and eventually she would get her point across and she'd win 90% of the time. She was remarkable for the meetings, as they said. As a DPO voice and one for the League of Women Voters, she'd attend the county board meetings, township board meetings, resource planning meetings, finance meetings, and any other meeting that had an agenda item that she seemed to like. Members of the county board got to know her so well that they would get worried and call if she didn't show up. Sometimes they appreciated it, sometimes they didn't. One of the meetings that we had was a hearing on something over at the Landmark. And this was before I got to know her very well. So afterward, we decided to have a glass of wine on the deck. And then we had another glass of wine. And then we had a third glass of wine. And I'm thinking back on it, I think I led and she followed me home that night. Or I led to her house. I know that was it. I led to her house and she said, it's okay if you go slow, I'll follow you. The next day she said, we shouldn't do that. Her interest in the county doings and the environment and ecology and natural history of the county and her untiring involvement in DPO has caused us to name one of our annual awards, the Pat Miller Advocacy Award, which is given to a person or organization that best shows the extraordinary effort to improve the community dialogue on a significant issue affecting the quality of Door County's natural and/or created environment. And if that doesn't describe Pat, I don't know what is. One other little thing I noticed, I remembered one day, I just happened to think of it today when Larry was sitting there. She came into a meeting one day, and I used to work for the DNR, and she said, how much trouble am I going to get into on my beach? I said, what happened to your beach? Well, she said, the kids were there this weekend, and they mowed all the grass. And I know you're not supposed to mow all the grass. And I said, Pat, grass grows back. Oh, okay. The only long-running difference that we ever did have was when she helped me edit the DPO newsletter. I've got a lot of problems with spelling and punctuation, and she thought she was my editor for that part mostly. And of course, there was one other little problem, is that humor page that's on the back end of it. And I do a lot of things with humor, and I like it. But Pat thought we could use that to better stead with some serious issues. And of course, we'd talk to people about the newsletter, and the first thing they said, don't ever get rid of the humor page. And Pat would, okay. And that was the first page that they would read. They said, don't drop it. So I won that argument only because I'm the writer and the editor, and I got the last kick at the cat before it goes to the publisher. In all seriousness, though, Pat was one of the most polite, hard, courteous, and lovable ladies it's been my honor to know. Actually, she was more like a grande dame. I always thought excuse me, she was also one of the prettiest ladies I've ever known. There I go. Sexist again. But they don't make many like her, and I'm going to miss her for one. Thank you. There you go.
How's everybody doing? I'm Mike Otto, Pat's nephew, Mark's cousin. And Mark asked me to be the keynote speaker today, so I brought a few notes. Starting with the letter A for Aunt Pat. Actually, I'm just kidding, Mark. Pat, as you all know, was a very intellectual, cerebral person. She was very well read. She loved to talk about anything, loved to discuss things. So she was very family friendly. As kids, she was very welcoming. As adults, she was very welcoming. She welcomed our spouses, our kids equally as well, and we very much appreciated that. She was always truly glad to see us, and we were glad to see her. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. It's my brother, Chris. Some called her strong-willed. I don't know if any of you knew that. Some would even call her stubborn. Anyone? No. She told us she was a political junkie. In fact, we were visiting her last fall, just before the presidential election. And she came, my wife and my daughter and I. And Pat said, well, who are you voting for? Ooh. Yes.
And it was the first question.
Yeah, she was in the hospital having a little trouble breathing. She had an oxygen mask on, and the first thing she said was, who are you voting for? And my lovely wife, Kay, said, who are you voting for? And she said, well, Obama, of course. And we said, well, we're okay then. My dad was Larry, Pat's brother. She never hesitated. Larry Otto, give it up, Gary. Also known Commander Larry Otto. Yeah. She never hesitated whenever we asked for stories about Larry as a young kid. She enjoyed in doing that. We knew him as a big, strong man. She knew him as a skinny punk who needed help finding his way home from school, and so we enjoyed that.
Didn't he bring his boat right in here? And
So it was his grandma's birthday, his mom's birthday, and he was a commander on the U.S. Coast Guard Mackinac, and they happened to be in Lake Michigan. He said, "It's my mom's birthday," so they anchored out here, and they brought a little boat in to the Glidden Lodge, walked down the beach, and said hi to his. In his full uniform, of course, yeah. He didn't get his shoes wet, and you guys were there for that. Yeah. The Glidden owner panicked a little bit when the Coast Guard docked in front of his lodge. So just on behalf of my family, we're all very proud to be related to Aunt Pat Miller. So thank you.
Not to be outdone by my older brother, Mike. Since we're all here for the same reason, I think it's finally time for me to say something out loud. My name's Chris, and I am a Pataholic. Well, I'm going to take a little take on the open door policy of Aunt Pat. It goes back a long ways. So during the summers, we used to often trade places. We'd always kind of work Mom and Dad and work Aunt Pat and say, "Hey, can we trade places?" You know, like I would go with Larry and Mark down to Palatine, and Julie and Mary Pat would go to Sheboygan and stay in Sheboygan, Michigan. And so later in life, I was working in marine construction in Highland Park. And I thought, this is great. I can stay at Aunt Pat's. You know, like free rent, you know, and I got a place and then food. This is going to be great. So I pull in, and of course, Aunt Pat's response was, "Well, we have to discuss fiscal responsibility." So upon paying rent and buying my own food, I stayed at Aunt Pat's. And everything in the fridge was triple wrapped, by the way, for freshness. So one night, I was out late. Didn't happen very often, no. And I lost my house key somewhere in downtown Chicago. So I couldn't get in the house. The thing was locked up like a steel trap. So wearing pants, I always had a knife on me. So I just carefully cut the screen on the back door and opened it and reached in and undid the doorknob and got in, and then carefully pulled the screen back up and just let it sit there. And the next morning, Aunt Pat's like, "So, I see that the screen's been cut." Which had direct bearing on my future, by the way. I said, "I'll be glad to fix it." "Oh, well, yeah, we'll take care of that." And she wasn't worked up at all, just kind of like her usual. She gave me that little, you know. Next thing I know, I've cleaned the basement, cleaned both bathrooms, and fixed the screen door. That's Pat. So at that time, I dedicated myself to move from marine construction to building homes, because I will never, ever be responsible for not hanging my own screen door after doing damage to it. So that's my memory of Aunt Pat.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Carol Otto, and I've nothing not related to that group of Ottos right there. Okay. So Aunt Pat was my aunt, right? And I have just some very random memories. One of them was many years ago when Uncle John passed away, and we came for the funeral. And I just recall at the funeral she wore this beautiful white dress with bright green flowers on it, and it stuck in my head for some reason. And I thought, what a beautiful dress and what a celebration of Uncle John's life. And it kind of went in the back of my head. And then some years later, when Grandma Otto died, she wore that same dress, and I remembered. And I said, Aunt Pat, that beautiful dress, it's the same dress you wore to Uncle John's funeral. And she said, yes, I saved it specifically to wear to Grandma's funeral, and now I can retire the dress. So her resilience, her forethought, and some of my greatest memories are, my dad was in the Coast Guard, so we moved every 2-3 years. And some of the best trips, you know, moving, and we had a big trailer, and we moved the whole family, was stopping in Door County on the way to, let's say, Alaska, right? Okay. Right? And then when we moved from Alaska to Michigan, Door County, right? So it was always on the way home. You know, and 3 words, when I think of Aunt Pat: witty, intelligent, committed, which you all know that about her. A couple other memories, these have to do with food. Okay, go figure. One of the trips, and she still lived in Palatine, she made this wonderful spicy sausage egg bake, which you make the night before, which is wonderful. You put it in the fridge, right? And then you can clean your kitchen. Then when the family comes, you put it in the oven, kitchen's clean. And I got that recipe from her. And I won't say I've made it hundreds of times, but I've made it for my family many, many times. It's become one of our brunch staples. One of my last trips here, I was here in 2009 and again in 2010, and she talked about the bistro, I think in Egg Harbor, that restaurant. She talked about their cherry scones, how good they were. And she went so far as getting on the internet, she got the recipe and knew I liked to bake. So she showed me the recipe. She said, we really, really should go to the bistro and tell them that we're going to try their recipe. And I really didn't want to do that, okay? So we ended up in Egg Harbor. We went miniature golf. I think Emily was with us. Jenny Lee, right? Where's Jenny? So we went miniature golfing, and then that really great ice cream place that's there. Yeah. Yeah, she bought us ice cream. And some of these pictures here in the wooden frame with the little Dutch hats, and my dad and mom and Aunt Pat are sticking their heads through, that was at the ice cream place. I could tell she really, really wanted me to go to the bistro with her and talk about the scones. So I said, you know, she wants it that bad, we'll go. So we went. All the scones were sold out, right? I'm like, well, they must really be good. So went home, made the scones with Door County cherries, fantastic. So that's another now Otto family recipe. So my last visit with Aunt Pat was, I believe, late October, maybe early November, and she was it Lake Barrington Woods? Okay. So my father, the commander, had passed away last July. And Aunt Pat couldn't come to the funeral. She wanted to, she just couldn't. So my sister Mary and I were there, and Larry and Mark and Mary Pat and the families and Sherry. So my sister Mary brought my father's eulogy. So we went through Dad's whole eulogy, the music and everything, and the eulogy was hilarious and had a lot of nautical, yeah, Coast Guard and all that. And one of the songs Mary and I had sang at Dad's funeral was a responsorial psalm, and it was "Shepherd Me, O Lord." And so Mary and I, so we sang it for Aunt Pat. So Mary and I start singing, and this wonderful alto voice I'm hearing behind me. I turn around, and there's Sherry, right? Singing the song with us. And it was so wonderful because a cappella, so now we've got the melody, we've got the alto. So we're singing the song. We sing all 5 verses. And here Aunt Pat is laying in bed. She starts nodding her head, and she starts singing with us. It was a wonderful, wonderful moment. And I guess that's it. But yeah, we loved her very much, loved the family, and wonderful to hear maybe some of those aspects about her that we didn't really know about. Yeah, thank you very much.
Mary Pat and Mark and Larry. Larry, your mother got me in a world of trouble.
Now it starts, okay.
For a change, huh? I don't recall the time I met her, but a few days later I ran into her in Walmart and she said, "You know, you really should get involved in town government. There's some funny things going on." And I may have said something like, "Oh, okay, I'll think about it." That night, the editor of The Advocate called and said, "Pat tells me that you're willing to write an article about what's going on in the town of Sevastopol." And I said, "Well, I don't know how to write. I've never been to the town board meeting." And the editor said, "Well, the next meeting is Tuesday the 15th or whatever, and sometimes they're boring, so take a book to read." So a little closer. So that on the appointed date, I went to the town board meeting, and Pat and I were the only people besides the town board members, which I thought was a bit strange, but she said, "Just pay attention and take notes because you're going to write an article." And I did take notes. I think actually I took a tape recorder because I didn't trust that I could write quickly enough. And it was not boring. It turned out that there was some interesting things going on with the finances of the town of Sevastopol. And those of you who were around in the 90s may remember that, well, it was very interesting. I started to write the articles, and then it became even more interesting because within an hour after the paper appeared, there'd be a message on my answering machine at home. "Well, you didn't quite get that right." And I would say, "Well, I had a tape recorder and I listened and it was at this point." And there was even one gentleman who called and used some rather colorful language. And I actually answered the phone on that one, and my husband will tell you that I said to him several times, "If you use that word once more, I'm going to have to hang up." Which I did. Well, to make a very long story short, by this meeting, I did get involved in journalism on a limited scale, and I learned an awful lot about Door County. But basically, I learned that it's a better place because Pat worked very hard to expose some of the events that were going on and that the finances were not as they ought to have been and so forth. So all of us should thank Pat that things are better in most of the townships, but certainly in the town of Sevastopol. Are you the delivery man? Sorry.
Hello, I'm Kay Otto, and I chose to join the rest of them. You may question that decision, but whatever. So, I met Pat before we got married, but she was always very, very welcoming to me, and whenever I would come with the family. And Mike and I ended up coming to Chicago. He did a residency here, so we spent 3 years in Chicago after we got married. And we had our first daughter here in Chicago, who was the first great-grandchild for Grandma Otto. So at the time, they were living in Palatine, so we were about 40 minutes away. And Aunt Pat said, you know, Grandma would love to meet her great-grandchild. So we came. She was a couple weeks old, I don't know, three weeks old or something like that. And Aunt Pat, Uncle Chuck brought Grandma to Aunt Pat's in Palatine, and Mike and I and Rachel came to see her. And Aunt Pat, you know, we all know she was a rather strong person, but I think we know where that came from because I'm pretty sure it was her mother that was. So Aunt Pat warned me a little bit. She said, now, you know, Grandma may give you some suggestions or, she may have some comments for you. And so sure enough, we come in, and Mike and I come in, and Grandma was sitting on the couch, and we bring Rachel over to her, and she takes a look at her, and she says, oh, this is my great-grandchild. She's beautiful. And then she turns to me, and she said, the next one will be a boy. But that was good, and the next one was not a boy, however. The third one was. But then a few moments later, Rachel started crying, and she's a new baby. I had been pretty much spending 24/7 with her last month of whatever, her first month. But Grandma then chose to tell me what I should do to take care of my new baby. And Pat just looked at me and gave me a very knowing nod, like, just listen, it'll be all okay. So that was my fun. And and Pat, since then, our children have always been very welcomed by her. She's always, every time we see her, she wants to know what they're doing. She wants to know everything about them. And we have a couple musicians, and that has been very nice for her. She's really seemed to have enjoyed that as well. So we just have really enjoyed all of our time with her and all of you.
All right, I was not going to say anything. But I have to, because I'm on the town board in Sevastopol, and after listening to her comments, first I have to let you know that I didn't join until 2001. So the finances were all squared away, and they still are, okay? So I just want to let you know that. The other thing is, Aunt Pat, who really was my cousin, always encouraged me to get involved in the town board. And it worked. And in order to get on a town board, you had to go out and have nomination paperwork signed. And of course, after you did that, you turned it in, and then hopefully somebody voted for you. Well, I went through that process twice. The first time I didn't get elected, the second time I did. And of course, I would stop at Pat's and say, would you mind signing my paperwork? And she'd, sure, fine, I'll sign it. She'd sign it, hand it back to me, and then she'd look me right in the eye and she'd say, doesn't mean I'm voting for you. And she did this to me 2 years in a row. And then I would run into her at the grocery store, and she'd try to convince me to run for county board. And I'd go home and I'd tell Arlene, she's got to be nuts. I mean, anyway, that's my story, and the government here is in pretty decent shape. Thanks to Pat.
I'm not going to be able to get out of here, so I'm doing it from here. Okay, I am. I'm Arlene Wolfel, Dan's wife, and we always refer to Pat as Aunt Pat, even though she's a cousin-in-law to me. And she was very welcoming. I really appreciated her when I first started coming up here. But my story about Aunt Pat is she convinced me to be part of the Whitefish Bay Association. She works all angles. So anyways, Pat was a charter member of the original, this is how Whitefish Bay Association got started, and she encouraged me to be on that charter membership. And she convinced me to be the secretary. Oh my God. So I really take pretty good notes. I consider myself very detailed. And every time we got back together, she made all these corrections to my minutes. And, oh yeah. And I tried to learn her shorthand. But anyways, so every time I'd turn in the minutes and she would correct them, she would be like, well, they weren't exactly right. And so after a while, I learned to give her the minutes before I sent them out to anybody. And I'd say, here, Pat, would you approve these? And she would always make changes to it. I don't know how she kept up with all the details in her shorthand. And then our other connection, of course, was baking. She loves sweets, and so, yes. And the last time she was up, she had given me all of these recipes that were written on little postcards, and I sat down with her for hours trying to reconstruct them because they were written in pencil and they were starting to fade. But we do have many favorite recipes of Aunt Pat's. I think one being apple slices and deep fried donuts. So. Oh. I learned that today.
Hi, I'm Mary Anderson, and I live next door with my husband Greg to Pat's home, and now the kids' home. No, I'm just going to stay sitting. But I have a sweet story to tell about Pat. I love to go to garage sales, and everybody here knows that. And so one day I was at a garage sale, and these two ladies, we were chit-chatting, and they asked where I lived, and I said, you know, down on Bark Road, a lot of people don't know where that is, but, you know, maybe you know somebody that lives near me, and it was Pat Miller. And the lady said, oh, Pat Miller? She said, well, I was at the grocery store one day, she said, I had all this company coming, and she said, I was so embarrassed, I had tons of groceries, and I'd forgotten my wallet. She said, I didn't know Pat from anywhere. Pat was in line right behind her. She said she wrote out a check. She just said, just send me the money. Oh my gosh. And that's Pat. Oh my gosh. So, she did.
Thank you. It took me a few minutes to work up my nerve, my courage, but I can't tell you how good it is to be here, how much I thank you folks, the family of Pat, for hosting this and giving us all the opportunity to share and relish together the memories that we have, each in our own way, of Pat. And you've all covered the scene very well of all the remarkable things this remarkable woman was capable of doing and accomplished. I remember one night, and I'm one of her neighbors. We lived not so far apart that we couldn't walk back and forth to visit, and we are among the aging ones of Whitefish Bay. So, but I remember one night I was sitting at the desk in the Miller Art Center, and Pat stopped by. She'd been on the go all day. I was ready to go home and call it a day, but Pat was, and we were both tired. And Pat had at least one or two more meetings that she was going to attend to, and as you've all said, never left a thing undone. But there's something else about Pat that I would like to include in our tribute to her. I knew her best, perhaps, through our association at St. Joseph's Retreat Center, and I knew her not best, but admired her most deeply in her deep spiritual and religious commitment, which was a very basic part of Pat's life, and a part that we shared together. We also shared together some good visits about our families and her deep love and concern and pride in each of her children. And we need to pass that on. Thank you very much.
I'm Lauren Dorman, and I am Pat's oldest niece. And I have many wonderful memories of Pat, but probably the one that is fondest to me is the time she took me to prison. last summer, Larry Otto's health was failing, and we all gathered in the Ann Arbor area to have a time together as a family. And unfortunately, Pat got sick right before that and wasn't able to make that trip. And so a couple weeks later, she had recovered just enough that we thought it might be advisable, and time was growing short with Uncle Larry. So I said I would drive her over there. It was, I was a little, I had a little trepidation about the trip. She was in a wheelchair at that point and was newly on oxygen. So, there was a lot that I felt I had to be responsible for. And as we're driving around the bottom of the lake to drive over to Ann Arbor, she asked me to get off the highway and drive to Westerville. And I said, why? And she said, well, I used to work there, and so I want to see it again. Okay. Well, she's telling me the story as we're trying to find the location where she used to work. This was the hospital for the criminally mentally insane, where she was a music therapist and where she began her career in the late 40s or early 50s. And she's thinking it's going to look the same as it did back then. And I don't know what to expect. And we finally pull up to this complex that's enormous, sprawling place surrounded by barbed wire, and it turns out it is now an Indiana maximum security correctional institution. So I'm trying to figure out, she says, well, I go in, and I'm like, how am I going to go in? So I find an access road, and I start driving in, and I'm looking in my rearview mirror, and there's a car following me. And it's one of the guards, I'm not supposed to be on this road, I guess. Anyway, they finally direct me to the visitor parking, and I park there, and she's pointing out the building that she lived in, and she says, I want you to go in because I want to go in and have a tour. It was about 95 degrees. I didn't think it was going to work real well to try to get her into the place, but I said I would go in and see if I could find somebody who could talk to her. So I go on in, and as you enter, it's the place where people who are visiting the prisoners come in. So they're being searched, and they're, all their, and it was just not a very pleasant place. And I'm concerned because it's so hot, and I've got my aunt who's on oxygen sitting out in the car in the heat, and I want to get back out there. Anyway, I went to the woman at the desk, and I thought, she's just going to laugh me right out of here. And I told her the story. I said, my aunt worked here, 60 years ago, and she would like to talk to somebody about how it's changed. And instead of throwing me out, the woman said, well, let me place a call, and she does, and she said, our director of media relations, who knew a prison has a director of media relations, will be down to see you in just a minute. And I waited, and by George, he came down, and I explained the situation to him. I said, she's very frail, and it would be difficult for me to get her out of the car and into the wheelchair, and he's like, no problem, I'll come out there. So he came out to the car, and in the 95-degree heat, he sat there and chatted with her for a little while and kind of reviewed old stories with her. But that wasn't quite the end of the story. I shared with him my email address. I wanted to get out of there, you can imagine. Plus, we still had a long way to go to get to Ann Arbor. I shared with him my email address, and a few days after we returned to Chicago, he found her handwritten time record and other articles and stuff from her time when she worked there. I don't know how he unearthed it, but he emailed it all to me, and so I was able to print it out and give it to her, which I thought was really sweet of him. But anyway, that was the time my aunt took me to prison.
I am the second oldest niece. And my story is not as long and not as good as Lauren's, but it has to do with state police. Oh. Whoa. In 1956, Dad got stationed in Cleveland, Ohio, and we had I had 3 younger brothers and sisters. And we flew, I think we might have flown to Chicago. I don't know the details because I was only 4.5 years old, 5 years old. But Aunt Pat, and you've all heard the testimonials of what a generous, loving person she was. She volunteered to drive my mother and 4 little children from Chicago to Cleveland. I think that's what happened because somehow Aunt Pat got pulled over in Ohio right before Christmas. And Dad had to fly ahead and start working in Cleveland, so she volunteered to take the rest of us and drive us. She was going too fast. I don't know why she would have been in a hurry to get to where she was going with 4 little Otto children in the back seat. But this is what my mother told me. All of a sudden, you know, she was Leadfoot Linda, and she looked in the rearview mirror. Woo, 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 woo. She got pulled over, and the officer looked in the back of the car and was not real happy that she was speeding with 4 little children back there. So he talked to her very sternly, and again, some of this is from my mom because I don't remember it all, but I remember one really important thing. He was getting ready, the state trooper in Ohio, and if you ask my brother Michael, Ohio is not one of his favorite states. The state trooper bent over, looked in there, and I could just sense, I remember the feeling, you had a uniform on and a big badge, and my mother and my Aunt Pat were cringing. Oh no, here she's trying to do this loving Christian act, and she gets pulled over. So somehow, I don't know how, maybe it's pre-law school intuition, I rolled the window down and I said in my nicest, sweetest little 4.5-year-old voice, "Merry Christmas, officer." Tore up the ticket, threw it away.
Border Patrol stories or anything?
Go, Daddy, go. Go. Keep going.
That's a hard story to follow, but I just and some of you might have heard this at the wake in Arlington Heights, but this is a story from when Aunt Pat was really little. She and my mom, Audrey, were like best friends and cousins, and they lived together in the same house in Milwaukee, the Galls. And I think they were like 6 or 7, and one day they decided to pick all the tulips in the yard. And so Laurentia, her mom, and Rita, my mom's mom, were really mad at the little girls, and they said, "Why did you pick all those tulips?" And, you know, I don't know if it was my mom or Aunt Pat, thinking really quickly, said, "Oh, it's for the Blessed Virgin." So I couldn't say anything after that.
Can you hear me? I really don't want to use this mic, but my name's Mary Fredericks. I've known Mary Pat and Mary Kay 25 years, I think. So I've known Mary Pat's mom almost a little less than half my life, or more, I don't know. 25 years. I'm over 50, unfortunately, but just two real quick stories that I kind of want to mention. Mary Pat's mom was always what I thought a very religious person. And driving here today, from where we were coming, my husband said, well, let's get out the map and everything. And I said, I think I know where I'm going, because I really started coming to Door County because of Mary Pat and her mom. I was here before they even had the beautiful house that her mom built when she retired. So as we're driving here, we went by, I think it's St. Paul, Peter, the Catholic Church, and I said to my husband that I've been there with, Mary Pat and her mom, and our group here kind of had a nickname for her mom, and Mary Pat mentioned it at her mom's service in Barrington, so I think it's okay to say it, but we always called her Mrs. God, and it truly was a term of endearment. By all of our group over here, because she really was a religious person, and I admire that in her. And the second short story is my husband and I always come up here every summer. This was maybe 2-3 years ago. He loves to come here Saturday night for the prime rib special, and I said, you know what, we need to call Mrs. Miller and see if she'll go out to dinner with us. And it was the last time that I saw her here in Door County. But we stopped at the house, and Chuck had his mom and brother with him, and we came down here to Glidden, and we sat right over there by the windows, and we just got to talk about what was going on with Mrs. Miller and Door County, and I'll always treasure that moment. So.
Hi, I'm Kathy Craig, and Mark and Jenny Lee have blessed me dearly by being Emily's godmother. And I have known Mrs. Miller for about 35 years, just about as long as I've known Mark. I came up here with Mark and my boyfriend Joe Malambri and 2 other friends of ours from college in 1978, when it was still the captain's cottage, I'll call it. Had a wonderful time. And I didn't actually meet Mark's mom until a few years later. I'm not sure if it was because of being chosen as Emily's godparents that she treated us, Joe and I both, as family. We had actually gone to watch the Bears game and share some time with her, which unfortunately happened to be the day that she left this planet, and felt a little uncomfortable, like we didn't belong, but didn't matter that we weren't blood. The family has always treated us as such, and we were very blessed to be a part of that. The many countless stories I could tell you, and if Joe were able to be here, what he could tell you of the conversations, endless conversations that we've had, everything from God to politics to family to government, just amazingly intelligent, well-spoken individual. I just retired from teaching for 30 plus years, and many times I would come and we'd talk about the school systems and the trouble the systems are in and across the country. And she always had such, sharp insight into things that were going on and was so willing to share, very supportive of your endeavors that you did. And she was just a unique and amazing woman.
I'm seated over there, and I was talking to Tom, and Tom said something that I thought was really amazing, and I really admire about my mom, and that was that she was able to ask the tough questions, and I really I thank her for that, to show us the way to ask the difficult questions and the questions that nobody really wanted to ask. And one other thing, she invited me to go to the town board meeting. I said, well, I'll go. Can my girlfriend go? Yeah. Sure, bring her along. We were the only ones there. Laddie was there. I know what you're saying. I'm like, oh, okay, this is what happens. It was, I don't know, it was really said a lot about my mom to be where not anybody else really wanted to be at the time. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm the youngest niece of Pat. And Otto. Mine will be quick. When we came to see Aunt Pat in the fall, my daughter and I came to visit her, and she was in Lake Barrington Woods. We went and ate lunch with her. During lunch, she would kind of wander off a little, and she would say, I have a stick of butter in my room. And, being a cheesehead, Pat and my dad, cheese, butter, all those dairy things were always, big. Ice cream, yes. And so I didn't think anything of it, and we went back to the room later. And she was in bed, and she said, I have butter in my room. So I was like, okay, that's great. We tried to change the subject. And so we left, and we came back the next day, and we went down, and we had ice cream, of course. They had ice cream, that's why I think she chose Lake Barrington Woods, because they had ice cream every day. So we went back to the room, and she said again, we gave her a nice little gift of chocolates, and she said, I have butter in my room. And I said, I looked at, I think it was Mary Pat, and I said, does she really have butter in her room? And she said, yeah. She insisted that someone get her a stick of butter, and they got a little refrigerator, like a college, dorm room refrigerator, and sure enough, there was like a pound of butter in her refrigerator. I don't know that she ever touched it, but I can tell you that wherever she is today, she has a cold, hard stick of butter for that moment that she is looking for a little bit of her cheesehead roots.
Anybody else? All right, I have a very short one. Okay.
No, I can't do that at the same time. I have two hands here. There we go. Okay, a few notes here. One more time.
Thank you, Laddie. No, I'm not gonna. No way I'm gonna top that one. I have one little story to share. Back when I was dating Mary Pat a while ago, and it was kind of a prolonged dating period, 6 years. And somewhere during this period of time, I had the opportunity to speak with Pat. For some reason, Mary Pat wasn't around, so her and I just talked about something. And the next day, I would tell Mary Pat, I say, hey, I was talking to your mom about this. Oh, well, okay. Then next time, I was talking to your mom about this. Oh, okay. So next time, there's another time I was telling her, well, we were talking about this, and we talked about this, and we talked about this. And Mary Pat kind of looking at me, like, yeah, okay, get to the end. And I says, fine, oh, okay. Wait, there's one more thing. We talked about this too. And finally she turns to me and she says, what is it about you and my mother? I think this is the reason why. Thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. Laddie, thank you for putting everything together for us. Thanks everybody for coming. Have a great day.
Covered up and get it on the line.